Howdy folks, welcome to Bullish on Farming. Today's May 26th and just hanging out with our Hereford girls. Bless our Red Angus. She's the boss cow. And today I just want to talk about our pastures a bit because we landed on this farm in the fall and it was sold in the summer, and these pastures have been rested since about August. It could be earlier. The fella sold all his cattle and nothing's been on here. I know that because I was told, but also I walked the farm and I checked out all the fields and everything looked like it grew out in the fall. And same with our hay fields, no second cut was taken. And I was actually blown away by how high the hay fields were. But let's talk about this pasture. Because it's been rested for 7 to 8 months, all that carbon that got laid down on the ground, smothered by the snow, died through the dormant season, created a strong carbon cover, which I speak about on this channel. And you know, those of you who've heard Gabe Brown and even Greg Judy, they speak about it a lot. And experientially, it's verified for me. I look down at the soil here, or the ground, and I pull away the green, and you see that brown, dead carbon. You can't see any bare soil. Now, to a conventional farmer, that may not be good news. I've heard guys say, oh, you don't take a second cut, it doesn't grow back as good. And, oh, you scoop up some of the old stuff. But if you take a look at nature and what it's done over millennia, obviously the cattle didn't graze every field down perfectly. And I say perfectly, all I mean is down to like 2 inches and manicured it in such a methodical way. That's clearly the design of man or woman. You got to be careful these days. But when you look at nature's design, the animals will bite a plant and move on. Okay, so if that's the way it is, then these animals were free-ranging through an abundance of pasture and consuming feed at their own discretion without feeling that feed was scarce, during the growing season at least. And, that could also be true through the winter months when you're talking about fields being stockpiled right. Obviously some fields weren't grazed in a year's time. You would think maybe they were. But in this big old world, if the animals are walking around, there's got to be fields out there that don't get grazed in a year's time. Sure, a deer might go through it, pick through it, and maybe some birds go through it, and some smaller animals. But a herd of cattle or buffalo or bison, I wouldn't believe that every single field is touched on this planet. That means that the natural way would be that the animals will dwell and move and migrate. And in doing so, will touch the fields that they come across. And the fields that they come across may be the same fields, or they may be different ones. And so there are fields that grow out and express themselves, establish root structure, overlay and die laying the carbon on the ground, like so. Creating a housing for the soil. No one's tilling the ground out in nature. You take a look at nature's design, there's no natural way that ground is tilled. Even the seeding process would just be from the native ranges. The seed blowing or falling down into the soil, and also being consumed by animals and dropped in their feces, germinating and seeding the ground. So why wouldn't that work for farming? Well, I'll tell you, it does. With all this carbon cover here, you're creating a housing for insects and microbial activity And I'd say that it probably expedites the process substantially. If you have bare soil, how's anything supposed to live there? It's getting direct heat from the sun. It's getting blown by the wind. It's getting hit by the rain as it falls. It's puddling and it's pooling. That doesn't really sound like a sufficient way for the ground to preserve itself and enhance fertility. So that's what we're trying to mimic with our animals, getting them to graze in a mob and move along. We're understocked this year. I've said that in previous videos, so we have the ability to practice that with more forgiveness. And I'm not worried about grass going to seed heads. Some people say, oh, grass goes to seed, cattle won't eat it. Those people don't mob graze. They don't use electric fence to size out paddocks. They don't understand how to put a certain level of pressure on the cattle with regards to sizing to make them feel like they need to eat particular plants. When you observe and work with these animals, it's experientially verified. So this stuff's not necessarily academic. That might be where it starts. You hear someone talk about it, like I am right now. And I got to give a huge shout out to Joel Salatin, Greg Judy, and Gabe Brown, who are probably the most influential in my approach to farming. Sure, it all sounds good when you first hear it, but it also hit home with me because it resonates with nature's design. It's not because I particularly like what they say, but what they're saying resonates with how I feel the relationship between the land and the animals is. And us as ranchers, farmers, we should be conscious and mindful of nature's process and look to work with it. I know that a lot of what's happened in farming is due to convenience and focusing on high yields and mass production. But again, that's not necessarily nature's way. In nature, things take time. It requires patience. And it also requires a non-forceful way of being. The way of nature moves on God's time. And if you're willing to align with that, the rewards come to you because you're aligning with the process of abundance, which is always available. You just need to align with it. Look at all this grass. I didn't create this grass. There's an abundance of grass. And it came from sunlight and rain and microbial activity and natural processes such as laying down dead organic matter, feeding the soil and creating housing for life forms. And life attracts life. It really is as simple as that. Every time you rip up your soil, you're killing about 95% of the life forms within what you stir up. How does that align with an abundant process? Sure, you might be able to force a monocrop production, but again, where do you see that in nature? Nature is a polyculture of species. It requires diversity to thrive because it all feeds off one another. And that's just akin to the circle of life. And so that's a little bit behind how we look at our animals and how we graze them. And we're blessed to have cattle and sheep on the farm. Some chickens, of course. And on the other farm I manage, pigs as well. And bringing that heart-based approach and listening to nature is the key. Anyone who's out there who's farming and you know, they want to know how they can bring more joy and expansion into their experience of farming. Just listen to nature and align with nature's way, and you'll find that the animals will do the work with proper management, and the whole machine intensive side of things it's not necessary. You can do it and it's fine, but it's not necessary. And when you're talking about soil health, that's not really the way to be benefiting. That's how you would maybe get a quick return on your buck. And hey, we all got to live, but there's something so powerful about aligning with nature's process and being empowered by the abundant framework that's available to all beings on this planet. And that's what we like to encompass and embody in our way of farming. So anyways, folks, a little philosophical, but maybe you found something in there you liked, and maybe you don't like it, but hey, this is YouTube. It's just a guy with cows and grass. Can't take things too seriously. So I'd like to say thanks for stopping by, folks, and God bless you all. See you on the next one.